A little while back, I made an episode where I brought home a 6-liter LS for Felony. And I changed my mind. I had a vision for this car when I first got it. I wasn't sure if I could pull it off. Some of you are gonna hate it. Probably a lot of you are gonna hate it. Some of you are gonna love it. I'm gonna love it. This is what I wanted to do originally. This is what I wanted to do before I got bit by the horsepower bug and tried to take the easy way out. This is a BMW M54 B30, and it is going in my 68 Mustang, one way or another. So let's jump into it. So a quick trip down memory lane will take us back to spring of 2024, where I picked up the 68 Mustang in Lodi, California with my good friend Bryce. It's a 1968 Mustang, it's mine. This car was a major tick off the bucket list, and I was so thrilled to get down to California and pick it up with one of my good friends. We loaded on a truck and trailer and headed over to Bryce's house in Auburn to get to work on the car. Of course, we had to stress test it first.
Oh, hope that's cool.
After several days at Bryce's place working on the car, I couldn't get it running quite well enough to where I felt comfortable driving it home. After quite a bit of tinkering, eventually the car would not run at all. After truck and trailering it all the way back home to Maple Ridge, I found out that the ignition was missing the constant 12 volts that it needed to run properly. Once the car was running, I drove it around town with the small block and the C4 automatic. After a few good burnouts, I decided to go full ham and start tearing the car all the way down to its shell. The hunt for rust and rot began. I started with the roof, chipping away the massive chunks of Bondo that had covered up the crimes of a body shop from the early 90s. I then found rust on the lower quarter panels, on both sides of the car, and underneath the carpet in the interior. I stripped the entire car down and pulled the 302 roller motor out of the engine bay to investigate further. At the same time, I drug home a 6-liter LS motor to put in its place. I began cutting. I found more damage on the rocker horn and the torque box. I re-and-reed new floors. I cut out the old torque box, got a new one in. It's all one piece. I replaced the damaged rocker horn with a new one, plug welded everything in place, put a new driver's side floor in, and that's where we are today. So let's go through the how and the why. How are you going to get this M54 to fit and work in a 68 Mustang? I don't know. That's the simple answer. I'm going to figure it out. On rough measurements, when I started looking into this, which was actually long before I thought about the small block, long before I thought about the 6-liter, I started taking measurements of everything in the shock towers. My goal is to actually have it fit between the stock shock towers and convert everything underneath to like a rack and pinion steering rack, different knuckles and hubs. So change up some stuff for some serviceability. I wanted to keep it simple. I wanted to keep it more vintage before, but I do want to make it more of a hot rod. I don't want it to be a simple re with old parts and old concepts. As you know, as much as I will still be keeping rear leaf springs and things like that, we're gonna have that vintage feel with some modern touches and some crazy stuff. It's gonna be a lot more fun than what I originally planned. And why did I change my mind? I have a 6-liter LS sitting on an engine stand over there. And when I brought it home, I was really excited to do some bolt-ons to it, get a Holley ECU on it and throw it in the car and tune it and be done. As things progressed with the car and I found more rust and more damage and started doing more metal work, I thought to myself that I owe it to myself and I owe it to the car to stick to my original vision. And this was the original vision. When I first saw this car, I had an image in my head of 6 throttle body stacks coming through the hood. Thanks to my buddy Dylan, who does 3D modeling, he did this little render for me and gave me an idea of what it could look like.
the car sitting low with some extra flare on the fenders and stacks coming through the hood. And I love it. I'm in love with this idea. And I want to make it work. I still don't know 100% of how we're going to do it. I have an idea of what trans I want to use. I still need to find wiring. We got to figure out fuel. But the biggest thing is we have to get the chassis fresh. So why not get something that's capable of more horsepower out of the box? I have a 6-liter over there. I could put a cam in it and make 500 plus horsepower. The simple answer is I've never been into that. The way that I've always put the cars together is with balance. I grew up watching things like Hot Version and the guys on the Toge at Gunsai, Tsuchiya, Burrito, all those guys battling each other in cars and figuring out balance and how to drive the cars, you know, at maximum attack with all the power that's available and all the dynamics of the chassis available to them. And that really stuck with me. I really like that idea in my head that I can mash the throttle and get through a corner and just have the car be fully gripped up and be able to use everything that's available in the chassis. That 6-liter puts a lot of weight up front in this car. It actually weighs 515 pounds just on its own. When you pair that with all the accessories and stuff like that, it's adding quite a bit. Now I know what you're thinking, like this looks like it's a huge motor. It is, but it's all aluminum. It's a lot lighter than the iron block over there. I think this thing only weighs like 300 pounds. I don't chase horsepower. I chase a dynamic and a driving feel. When I put the Verdict together with the Voodoo, you know, I could have just boosted the Coyote and made 800 horsepower. I didn't want to do that because I can't use 800 horsepower the way I drive the car, which is like every day across the country. You know, I take it to the road course and have fun around corners with it. And really, there are people that can do that, but they're throwing hundreds of thousands of dollars at their build. I'm not the guy that's going to do that. I'm a dude in a 2-car garage in suburbia. The GC8, I have a 550 horsepower capable motor in that car, but I've dumbed it down with small WRX turbo. It makes 250 to the wheels. And it's faster than a lot of stuff that it really shouldn't even hang with, but it does. And it's a ton of fun to drive. And on top of that, it stays reliable because I'm not pushing it to its absolute limit. What's cool about this whole idea is that I've taken inspiration from a lot of different things that I've seen built over the years. I have a lot of friends that have done things with Mustangs, things with BMWs, and that sort of thing. My friend Joel, Rollers Garage on Instagram, he has a whole bunch of old Ford stuff. He's got F100s, F150s. He's got a 66 Mustang Coupe with a 302 in it and a TKX backing it up, and it's set up to actually autocross. He drives the shit out of his car. He actually uses it as it's intended. He doesn't just throw parts at it and take it to a car show. He drives it. He tracks the car. Everything you can think of, he's got it done to that car. It is a fantastic driving car. I didn't get to really drive it in anger, but I did get to drive it a little bit on Power Tour on one of the stops this year. He was kind enough to throw me the keys and say, try it out. And it gave me a good idea of how I want my chassis to feel. On the other side, he also has a BMW 3 Series that he tracks and autocrosses with an M54 in it. It makes about 230 horsepower on the stock engine with just reliability mods to make it live. And he beats the crap out of it and he has a ton of fun. So seeing somebody that has the classic Mustang stuff, but also enjoys this side of things, you know, Joel's an awesome guy. He's a good friend. He's a big inspiration for me because he's a dad, he has a shop, and he works hard and he plays with his cars and tracks them really, really hard, and he takes care of them, and he has really nice stuff because of that. And he has some of the coolest shit that I've ever seen built. Way back in the day, Speed Hunters did an article on an old Volvo 240, and it had a BMW inline 6 swapped into it. It was a super sick car. I think it was Patty McGrath that shot it, and it was just this low, super low car with a rad paint job, just nice green paint job. The swap was really clean, and it was like literally just a Volvo hot rod from Europe. And that really stuck with me, seeing that car and the fact that you can just like, oh, you can take anything from one car and put it into another. Just that really spoke to me. And seeing things later on, like my friend Phil's Coyote swapped Volvo 240 is also something that has inspired me. One of the cars that I got to see in person in Arkansas has been actually one of the bigger inspirations for this build as of late. It's Chris Kluwell's W114 Mercedes that he has an S50 swapped out of a BMW M3 into. I think he had like 2 or 3 engines from Mercedes inline 6s. He actually had a really cool setup where he had 3D printed intake manifolds for DCOE carbs on a Mercedes inline 6 setup. It was really neat. He had like a 3D printed AMG valve cover and stuff for it. It was a really cool build. It was one of the builds on Instagram that I had followed like to a T and was so inspired by it. It was really cool. Chris is also one of the guys that runs Overcrest. He's a really nice dude, super creative, and he finds the best roads to drive in America. Dude, if you're watching, thanks again for a wonderful event. You're the man. His car is super cool. I got to see it in person at Overcrest in Arkansas, and I actually got to hear it run and stuff like that. Just it driving around, being in the mountains, and being at the meetup spots. It was really, really cool. And just kind of seeing all that, aside from everything that I've kind of done in the last few months, finally it was just like, okay, it's time to reveal this. I've actually had this motor sitting here for 2 months now, and I've just been kind of sitting on it. Somehow I haven't put it in any of the shots that I've had in the garage in the last little while, except for in the last episode. It kind of was visible in one of the GC8 shots from the Perseverance, my film about the Overcrest Rally in Arkansas. If you were watching that, thank you. If you go back, you can actually see it in a couple of the shots. That being said, I think what I want to do now is actually hook this up to the crane and see if we can swing it in the bay and just kind of dry fit it and see how things are looking. I can tell right away that the motor mounts are going to be in the way of the shock towers. I will have to do different motor mounts for the car. They're going to fabricate something, but let's swing it in there and see how it looks, see if we can make something kind of sort of get in the ballpark of where we need to be. Things are going to touch on the cross member, things are going to touch the oil pan of this, but I really want to kind of put it in place and give you guys an idea of my vision and give myself the motivation to keep going, even though right now the motivation is an all-time high. Morale is really good. I'm really stoked. Let's try and drop this thing in there and see what it looks like. Going to be somewhat difficult, probably stupid, but it might be worth, the juice might be worth the squeeze. We'll see. And that rear dolly is free. Perfect. All right. I don't even know if it goes that high, to be quite honest with you. You might be hosed. Okay. Carlo bar. This is exciting. This is really exciting, actually. Let's see how it looks. Get it out of the way. Okay. See how that does. Try like that. So far, we're almost clear. Well, that's cool. Damn. Dude, this is gonna fit. This is gonna work. Well, this thing surprisingly fits pretty decent for being an inline six, for being something that never ever would have ever belonged in this chassis. But what I can see just dangling it here in the engine bay is if I were to find a front sump oil pan for this engine, it would free up room at the back to probably almost run stock steering, and we could actually probably move it back even a little bit more. The crank bolt is actually right at the sway bar, which is about where the small block ended up in this car. The clutch sits about where the small block bell housing would be. It is touching the tunnel a little bit. If I end up having to clearance the tunnel or move back, there's a hump in here for the heater box. What I could probably do is actually cut and section that back a little bit if we end up having to make a little bit more space. So that's not terrible. The one thing that's kind of weird is there's this little, I don't know what this is on the back of the alternator, there's a little spout here. That's going to cause some interference with this shock tower because the motor can actually come this way a little bit more. But actually looking at it, the center of the crank is dead nuts down the center of the car right now, which is pretty cool. So we've got a ton of space on this side to put in an intake. If we run this intake for a little while, if something happens, we can't get ITBs. There's plenty of space for the dipstick to the sump. I've got space for the crank position sensor back here. I can see all the wiring, everything. Like there's tons of room on this side. Now coming over here, it may look like this is a tight fit. You know, having the top of the cylinder head sitting right here at the shock tower, but it's actually not. Because this is a canted motor, we have tons of space underneath to fit a header. Like I could shoot a header straight down the firewall right now. This doesn't look too bad. Like with a small primary tube header, you know, we're gonna have lots of space for, well, what do we got to put in here? We got to put a motor mount in. There's no steering linkage on this side, so we don't have to worry about any of that. We're not going to have to mess with the factory shock towers, so that's a bonus. I'm super stoked about that. We just have to run some wiring and stuff like that. We got room over here if we want to put in like any sort of wiring boxes or modules or anything like that. You know, the one thing that I can foresee already is we will have a little bit more room once I get the different oil pan on here to drop the motor down, but we probably are gonna have to find a cowled hood just to clear the front of the valve cover and the intake and everything, but that's not a big deal. I can get one of those from somewhere. There is quite a bit of a weight in a back order for Meyer Racing, so that's probably the hood that I would look for. Or maybe I can do something with the stock hood and cut it up. I don't know, it's not a fantastic hood and I really don't care. It's just a basic Mustang hood. You can find them all over the place. So this is pretty sweet. I do not have to really modify the shock towers or the core support or anything like that. Looks good. There's lots of space here. There's lots of space to run lines and accessories. All we're gonna have on here is an alternator and a power steering pump, maybe. So this is really exciting. I had my doubts about clearances and stuff like that. The motor looks a lot bigger outside of the car, but putting it in here, just test fitting it, it doesn't look that big. It almost fits as good as a small block does. The big thing is obviously we're gonna have to work out motor mounts, but there is a motor mount provision right across from the stock location on the Mustang. Right now, I know that this is gonna work. This will fit. I can mount this engine in here. I can fit a trans to it. I can make this work. This is really, really motivating. You know, you don't know until you just drop it into place and take a look. And with a few parts to swap over and things like that, we can make this engine fit almost flawlessly without having to cut or modify the stock engine bay. Like actually, it's kind of crazy. I will have to figure out some mounts on this side to catch the BMW side of things. My plan, my vision in my head is gonna come to fruition. I can see us on track next year with this car. Well, this is super exciting. There's an inline 6 in there. Right now, the motor is actually rocked a little bit forward and it's resting on the shock tower just because I want to take it off the hook, see if it'll kind of sit and stay. There's gonna be things that'll come up. They always are. There always is. But honestly, I did not think I would have this much space all around the engine to be working with. The one glaring thing that you can probably see from here is if you're really into modifying cars and track stuff, is you'll notice that probably over half the engine is sticking in front of the valve covers right now. What I'm hoping is that with the front sump, depending on how big it is, we can drop this thing down and back more, which will give us tons of clearance for the bell housing and the clutch and everything on the back. A little bit better weight distribution. I'm gonna try and distribute the weight to the back of the car as well, doing a battery back there. The car will have a harness bar, sort of half cage for rigidity, so there's gonna be a little bit more weight pushed back there, but this is actually, even with this being so far forward, it's still lighter than the small block was, the iron small block was with iron heads. That is a heavy engine. The LS is a heavy engine. This is gonna save a ton of weight up front and it's gonna be a lot of fun. Yes, it's not gonna make 500, 400, maybe even 300 horsepower. It's probably gonna be 250 horsepower, but it's gonna be in a 2,500 pound car, 25 to 26, we'll see. We've got a lot of things to lighten up, a lot of things to look at, but I'm really excited. This is huge motivation. Cue this part being in a future episode and me like tearing my hair out trying to get this thing running or something stupid. I haven't even got it registered in Canada yet. We're already fitting engines into it. All right, guys, that is gonna do it for this episode. The shop is all back together. The Mustang is back on the wall for now. The engine, the M54 is sitting right here up the front. I've got parts piling up actually for the GC8 because, as you saw from the end of the trip to Arkansas, it did go over the side of a mountain into a tree, and I gotta fix that damage and get this thing back on the road because this is my kind of winter fun car. The other cars are in storage right now. The next time you see this car, we're gonna be finishing up everything on the floor, on the firewall, getting everything solid up front so we can move on to finishing the roof, finishing the rest of the rust on the car, and getting it painted and just continuing on. I want this whole chassis to be fresh and ready to go by the end of February. And what I mean by that is I want to start putting parts onto this car, new parts, modified parts, modifying pieces of it, reinforcing things like the subframes, all that good stuff. I want to turn it into something, like I said, I want that vision that I have up here on that. All right, guys, it's late. I got to get this episode done. So I'm going to head back up to my office and get this all edited and finished for you to check out on Sunday morning right now. I really hope that you enjoyed this episode, and thank you to everybody that shared and commented and everything on the last episode, the film about my trip to Arkansas, the Perseverance. The GC is here. I've got parts coming in for it. We're actually going to get this thing fixed up after SEMA. I'm going to spend a full week and get it completely refreshed on the front end once again, and it's going to be back on the road. It still runs and drives. Everything's cool with it. I actually moved it today, as you saw. It was not in here. It's in here now, and we've got some parts on it, but you'll see more of that on the next episode. And then after that, after SEMA, after everything, we're going full ham on the Mustang. We're going to have this thing fresh chassis by the end of February into March, somewhere around there, and then I want to be bolting parts on it and getting this motor fitted by summer. So that's the goal. Let's make it happen. As always, guys, be kind, drive hard, and at some point, hopefully, in some project car that isn't broken or is maybe complete, I will see you on the road. Have a good one.
I do like the Dukes of Hazzard. All right, that's going to do it for this episode. Go f*** yourselves.